G'day mate, 40 here. So I'm really enjoying this book by Michael Wolff on the fall of Fox News, and it contains a quote from Roger Ailes, who says that most people on TV, meaning the TV presenters, are morons who learn to talk the talk, right? Who learn to speak in an appropriate TV way. By contrast, he says Sean Hannity is a moron who talks like a moron. And then Michael Wolff has a section on Rupert Murdoch employing the best First Amendment lawyers, not in a mission to protect important news for the American public, such as publishing the Pentagon Papers or the Glenn Greenwald revelations about the National Security Agency and its spying on American phone calls and emails, but to protect the basic tabloid instincts of the Murdoch press. And Michael Wolff says if Rupert had a journalism dictum, it would be don't overthink. Go with your instincts. And made me think, based on Ronnie Goodman's work in progress on conservative claims to cultural oppression, that one way of understanding the difference between right and left is the left is more self-conscious. So most people in the news media are highly self-conscious and reflexive, meaning that they're always kind of monitoring their words and their behavior and how it appears to outsiders. They are detached and disengaged, right? They don't tend to be partisan, wearing their hearts on their sleeve, but they try to appear to be non-partisan. And they're also disengaged in that they try to not allow themselves to be driven by visceral impulses, but instead try to transcend those in service of education, fighting bigotry, and the like. So do you think that's a good definition, or one major difference between left and right is that the left is much more self-conscious, buffered, meaning that they see individuals as strategic, autonomous entities that can pursue their goals through the power of reason and achieve them with sufficient discipline, while the right is less self-conscious, much more visceral, and much more attuned to basic tribal ties of blood and soil, religion, and kind of less likely to try to transcend these basic visceral impulses. So I think that's also an important distinction between the Murdoch tabloid news media, like Fox News is a tabloid operation, and the prestige media, just the level of self-consciousness. So the Murdoch tabloid media, right, they're having a good time, right? People on Fox appear to be much more enjoying themselves than the people in the prestige media, because they're not as self-regulating, right? They are not as mannered. They are more spontaneous. They are more visceral. They are people who employ kind of the Lord of the Manor morality, or if you're the Lord of the Manor, you can say more what you think. You can feel like you're the king of your own castle, and less concerned for consequences and how every different group out there might perceive what you're saying. While in the prestige media, there's much more of a courtier morality, where you're constantly measuring your words on the basis of who's up, who's down, what's the consensus, how will your peers perceive what you're saying, what could be the long-term consequences to your career, how will various constituencies experience and react to your words. So I think Fox News and conservatives in general have much more of a lord of the manor morality, and the prestige media and the elites have much more of a courtier morality. And I've been listening to the Duran podcast with Alexander Mercoulis, I think it's of Greek origin, has a background as a barrister in London in human rights before he was disbarred for an ethical violation. So I suspect Alexander Mercoulis doesn't have the strongest courtier morality, but has much more of a lord of the manor morality. And in the most recent episode, they had attorney Robert Barnes, who I think has his own show on InfoWars, Alex Jones's channel. And if you're right wing, right, Robert Barnes is a great delight to listen to. So I find myself enjoying listening to Robert Barnes' appearance here on the Duran, even though at the same time I have to keep reminding myself, you can't trust this guy, that's absurd. So I'm listening to him, I'm enjoying him, like, it feels so good to listen to this right-wing attorney Robert Barnes. His arguments are so appealing, yet when I examine them in any detail, they kind of fall apart. So one of his arguments is that January 6 riots on Capitol Hill were no big deal because there were no significant victims. Well, I think there were probably a couple of dozen police officers with non-life-threatening injuries. But I guess probably the biggest injury from the January 6 riot is, what's that called when you have trauma after a conflict? Damn, I'm blanking in my old age. I'm blanking on post-traumatic stress disorder, which I suspect the conservatives are probably a little bit more skeptical of the medical nature of this diagnosis. And it's interesting, post-traumatic stress disorder is the one mental health diagnosis that the latest DSM accepts, and it is based on social reasons and social perceptions. So, for example, if you lose a job, right, that you've had for 20 years and that you love, and 3 months later, after losing this job, you're still depressed about it, you've got a mental health disorder that should probably be treated with medication, would be a DSM approach, right? But if you were to look at things in a social level, like experiencing such a significant loss and still feeling quite sad about it 3 months later, it's no more natural and healthy. And so post-traumatic stress disorder also depends upon, it's the only one of the DSM mental health diagnoses, to the best of my knowledge, that depend upon some kind of social arbiter role. But probably the biggest injury, right, from January 6th is post-traumatic stress disorder, like the January 6th rioters didn't kill anyone, right? And I don't think anyone lost their legs as a result of the January 6th riots, meaning the people in opposition. I don't know if any rioters got stomped on, but I don't think anyone lost their legs or lost their arms. So probably post-traumatic stress disorder is the biggest injury from the riots. Anyway, Robert Barnes is a great deal of fun to listen to. But the best thing about the Duran podcast episode with Robert Barnes is what he brings out of Alexander Mercoulis in response to Robert Barnes. And to develop on some of Alexander Mercoulis' responses in this latest episode and combine with my own thinking it shows the role of overreaction and how people sabotage their goals. So it was probably nearly universal elite opposition to Donald Trump and contempt for Donald Trump and dismissal of Donald Trump that got Donald Trump elected in 2016. I think that's my working hypothesis that played a role. There was such a uniform loathing of Donald Trump that helped Trump connect with Midwestern voters who ended up giving him the presidency in 2016. Then Donald Trump's own behavior was so over the top that he managed to galvanize his opponents more effectively than he galvanized his supporters, leading Trump effectively to lose the 2018-2020 elections and possibly even, depending on how you analyze it, the 2022 election. So in 2016, it seems that the opprobrium directed at Trump by his enemies was so over the top that it galvanized Trump's supporters more than it galvanized Trump's opponents. So when you're trying to make any kind of social, cultural, religious, social change, right, you want to calibrate your words and your actions so that you strengthen support for whatever it is you're advocating more than you strengthen opposition to what it is that you're advocating. And now it seems like overreach against Donald Trump, once again by the elites, has positioned him for victory in 2024. I think you can make a good case that many of these court cases brought against Donald Trump in the last year have been overreach. It's been an attempt to take away from the American people the option of who they can vote for in 2024. Right? That's a threat to our democracy, bros. And so Trump was pretty much dead in the water until he started getting these string of court cases against him, I think beginning in March of this year. And now with all these court cases stacking up against him, the more legal trouble Donald Trump seems to be in, it does appear there's a reciprocal rise for Trump in the polls. So for Fox News in particular, they essentially had a softball ban on Donald Trump. They were all in for Ron DeSantis. And then the March indictment of Trump in New York, broke that ban. And then the further cases against Trump in Georgia, and then the January 6th case, right, just galvanized Republican support behind Trump, and also many independents. So, ever feel hungry like a wolf in association with listening to the Duran Duran? Yeah, so Duran Duran is like a visceral band. My favorite song of theirs is Ordinary World. I mean, that really speaks to me. So when you encounter a piece of literature or music or TV show or a novel or a film that really speaks to you, it's worth asking why. And so for me, this allure of an ordinary world that's just out there is highly enticing if I just get my medication level correct. Be careful on the streets home. A black brother like you is a target for the popo. Wise words, my friend, wise words. As an Indigenous Australian, as an Aboriginal Australian American convert to Orthodox Judaism, I know the truth of which you speak. But Makura's made a great point that I hadn't thought of. So one reason I listen to the Duran is that I often get perspectives and information and attention to news sources of which I was unaware. So I keep hearing, ideas, opinions, and information that I was previously unaware. And so Makura's made this great point that while the loathing for Trump is nigh universal in the Anglo world, right? Among Anglo elites, among America's elites, among British elites, among Australian elites, Trump is quite popular in Latin America and in Asia. and probably in Africa. So we tend to think that, the world is like the world we know around us. But with the election of Meloni in Italy, the surprisingly strong performance by Geert Wilders in Holland, the election of Javier Milei, who's converting to Judaism apparently, a strong pickup for the Jews. The election of Javier Milei as president of Argentina, and the surprisingly strong showing of support for Jair Bolsonaro, even though he lost to Lula, but he did much better than expected, and his party did much better than expected in the elections. There's a lot of support outside the European world for a Trumpian populist type of politics, which is largely based on loathing of elite consensus and elite prescriptions. So while the op-eds in the Financial Times, which I think I spend $180 a year for my Financial Times subscription, and of course in the New York Times, Washington Post, LA Times, in the American prestige media, and in the Australian media, just widespread revulsion for Donald Trump. In these other parts of the world, you have the emergence of all these Trumpian populist figures. So, because the people we know who are elite may now universally despise Donald Trump, that's not true in much of the world. There most likely would not have been a war in Ukraine if Trump had been president. We'd be less likely than to have war in the Middle East. I doubt that Hamas would have attacked Israel on October 4 if Trump had been president. I think we'd be less likely to get into war with China. The recklessness of Biden's foreign policy. So it's funny, Trump talks recklessly, but governed in a generally highly restrained manner with regards to foreign policy and minimizing the chances of America getting caught up in foreign wars, while the Biden team speaks responsibly, appears to act cohesively and responsibly. It's the administration with the least amount of leaking of any presidential administration in 80 years. But the net effect of their policies has been absolutely disastrous. Hey Crash, hope you had an amazing weekend, bro. Do you find Bolsonaro similar to that flamboyant Italian leader, Berlusconi? Yeah, Berlusconi was a Trump before Trump. I just don't know enough. But from what I do know, there's a kind of a populist, visceral appeal to Jair Bolsonaro, Berlusconi, and Trump. Like, none of these characters are known for being particularly self-conscious. Right? Meloni, Berlusconi, Trump, Javier Milei, Geert Wilders, Marine Le Pen. Right? These are not highly self-conscious leaders. Right? They're much more visceral personalities. And so the right-wing way of life is much more visceral than self-conscious. It's much more tied in to traditional loyalties and attractions than disengaged, reflexive, buffered, strategic, autonomous, rational identity is constructed by the left. All right, I hope everyone has an amazing day. Bye-bye. Wishing you good mental health, like Dr. Fraser Crane.